a very interesting topic that I'm personally quite interested in as well. It's about product development and, how do you build that mindset? This is an area where, we've seen a lot of founders struggle with at times because they don't come from a technical background, and this is why we felt that it's important to address this topic, especially given the situation we're in. Kind of the way the webinar will flow is myself and Roberto was my guest on the webinar. We'll have a discussion around product development and a few key topics that we'd like to address around 40 to 45 minutes. Along the way, if you have any questions, if you have comments, please feel free to leave them in the Q&A box or in the chat. We'll be regularly monitoring those. And then once we have this fireside chat, kind of concluded, we will then switch to directly responding to your questions along the way. So please feel free to keep engaged in the conversation. We have someone who is very, very experienced in this area, Roberto Croci. He is the regional managing director of Microsoft for Startups. So I'm very excited to have him on board. Roberto, if you could please give a bit of an introduction about yourself, and then we can get started.
Sure. Hello everyone. Thank you, Hisham, for the intro and setting the stage. It's definitely a great pleasure to share this time with you guys today and have a conversation about product development, and also I would say growth mindset and the right mindset, to face things. Quickly on myself, as you asked. So first of all, I would join you, Hisham, in the message of hope every one of you guys are all healthy, safe, doing well. This is the most important thing. Myself, I am originally from Italy, so you have probably seen the country has been hit in terms of number of deaths. So I'm from the north, so I have a lot of friends from old university times that have been, there are a lot of sad stories that are coming from there and now everywhere in the world. And I would also love to start the session sharing a message of gratitude to all the frontline doctors, nurses, everyone who is helping out in the hospitals, clinics, wherever in the world. My cousin myself is a doctor, is working in one of the hospitals close to Milan. So as soon as the outbreak started there, he's been quite busy in the intensive care unit. So he has been tested positively 5 days ago after a crazy extreme month helping out. Luckily enough, I received the news that yesterday morning he woke up from the, he was sedated in the intensive care. They moved to another area of the hospital now. He still cannot walk, but I think the worst is now behind for him. But these guys are really doing, all the doctors and all the people in the hospitals, and they are working in extreme situations. So they're really doing, an amazing job. And this is an example of mindset, how these people have been there, helping day and night to save lives. This is really inspiring, and these are the people that are really doing the hard work right now for all of us. Quickly on myself, as Hisham introduced myself, I recently joined Microsoft in the role as MD for Microsoft for Startups in the Middle East region. Before that, I've been working in a startup myself. It was an e-commerce multi-channel retail startup in the design and furniture industry. I joined Google. After that experience, I worked at Google for almost 10 years in a division of the company where it was kind of a startup, came through an acquisition of DoubleClick, and then we grew the business significantly for the past 10 years. And I also dealt with Google for Startups in the region the last year and a half. I moved to Dubai 5 years ago to look after the emerging markets region, and recently joined Microsoft to work even more in depth with startups in the region. I'm also co-founder of a micro VC fund back in Italy with some old friends from school. Very passionate about the ecosystem and definitely looking forward to the conversation today.
Fantastic. And yeah, just briefly, I completely echo what we talked about, the frontline individuals who are supporting and going above and beyond. Hats off to them. and kind of, there, we can see some parallels, I suppose, like you mentioned, in terms of mindset, and that's kind of where I want to begin the conversation about product development. Independent of, let's say, this crisis situation, where a lot of the times, founders, they don't come from technical backgrounds, and this is an area where they feel that they don't know what to do. So how does a founder, whether they're running a business already or they're looking to get into starting their own startup, how do they approach this challenge of product development and this whole um, like intimidation, to an extent? How do they shift that mindset of theirs if they're coming from a non-technical background?
Sure. So that's a great question, and that's a very interesting topic. I guess there is no right or wrong answer here, and it also a number of the things we are going to discuss might also change or differ a bit, whether we are talking about a very early stage startup still in the ideation phase, or a startup that is beyond the MVP and on a different challenge to grow and scale, also from a product perspective. But let's start. I would start from a few key principles. So definitely, when we talk about product development, to me, before talking about product, we are talking about the customers. So what's the value proposition, right? And who the customers are, because the product in the end is for the customers. So one of the key learning I have in my experience working in technology companies like Google, Microsoft, is being obsessed about the customer is probably number one thing that as a founder, I would instill, and this comes with the culture that you set into the startup, the team that you set up. So the obsession focus on the customer, building the right team, so the people that will help you build the product, and creating and nurturing every day the culture that you want to set for your startup. And I would say culture comes from the behaviors and the values that you really live by. So the standard you accept is the situations that you accept are company, for your business, for your team. So this is where I would say founder, even if coming from non-technical perspective, this is where the guidelines, the principles, the values have to be shared early on and have to be lived by, because this will guide also the device, definitely. We talk a lot about, for example, create a culture that is founded on a growth mindset, where growth doesn't necessarily mean looking at the revenue numbers that are growing. Growth means also that it's mainly about people. So it starts from a real belief that everyone in the company, everyone in the team can grow. Potential is really nurtured, not predetermined, and everybody in the team has the ability to change their mindset. Look at what, for example, even larger organizations and startups are doing, like Microsoft, for example. I can tell now from within, it became from, it changed, it started a transformation from being a know-it-all organization, a bit arrogant and maybe stagnant for a number of years, into something new today that is more in, a learn-it-all organization. And this comes from the top. This comes from it's not the founder, but the CEO, but it comes from the top. To set, new performance reviews and new behaviors and new set of values that the team are going to live by, to make sure that really happens across the organization. Of course, the people you onboard are key, because you cannot have someone to become curious when he is not. But the willingness to lean into uncertainty, to take risks, and the culture of failure that we hear talking every now and then about is it's all something that comes from the founder, and part of the culture needs to be part of the culture of the startup, of the organization.
Interesting. So I mean, like, the key takeaway like I had so far is essentially that the product journey, you're approaching it as you would the overall startup journey to begin with, right? has to be focused on the customers, what the value proposition is, regardless of whether as a founder you have the technical skill set or not. And I think that's an interesting observation, because that kind of solidifies this notion that you don't need that technical background to begin thinking about your product, right? You don't need to have that previous experience to begin having those discussions, or understanding how you're going to deliver that value proposition. Because at the end of the day, your product is going to essentially, it's just a means of you, communicating that value proposition to your customers. And in terms of mindset as well, I think you made a very valid point that it comes from the top. So I want to kind of now bring in this question where, as a founder, whether you have the technical background or not, how involved do you need to be in the whole product development process, right? So I won't necessarily, mean in terms of actually coding it, but how familiar or how, in-depth knowledge should you have? So that's one question. And secondly, if you don't have that technical experience, are there some tools or some courses that you could potentially do to enhance your understanding of the technical side of things?
That's a great point, Isham. So let me start from the first part of your question. So so as a founder, there are founders that come from a technical background, so they have the plus of knowing the technology landscape. They know what it takes to build a product, what it takes to fail, and what are the hiccups and the ups and downs of doing that. But at the same time, they might lack more of a broader understanding of how to set up things that might really work for a customer. It's not said that there are technical founders that are great at understanding that, but not necessarily. So I believe you should have both souls into the company. If you are a founder that doesn't come from a technical background, my belief is that you don't necessarily have to know the details of all the technologies, the frameworks, architecture, the stack that you're going to build onto. Of course, you have to learn about that in terms of how sustainable the whole thing is and profitable is going to be for your company. So you factor in all that into your plan and your vision. But for me, where I've seen a number of startups with great technical teams then go fail, or not having the success that they could have deserved or they could have get to, is that they lacked the leadership, and they lacked the real vision of who they were building the product for, and where they wanted to go, so who they wanted to be. So I see a lot of startups that a lot of founders that go very quickly into the solution space and build the technology, and this is great. You need to be early on there. You need to get feedbacks from users and customers, from people. But I see sometimes founders going too fast into the loving the idea and the solution, and not taking the necessary steps and time to step back and think more in depth about what is the real problem that they're trying to solve. And how and have leadership in terms of taking this forward. So my point of view is yes, the technicalities of things is something that can be learned, and it's important. But sometimes what I see missing is enough critical thinking and enough time spent onto the problem itself. This is one of the things that might make a real difference. Also, one other thing is sometimes And again, it's a general observation. It's more a provocation. It's so it's also to raise the conversation as well, and the questions maybe is also sometimes we see founders that are too fast in saying, oh, now I need to hire a chief sales to grow. Now I need to hire a CPO for product. Now I need to hire a CTO. And yes, I mean, of course, it comes a time when you need that expertise to build the foundations and the scale, but it's the founder himself is the first user of what he's trying to build. So if that comes too early on, it might also mean that the founder has not done enough to do the customer validation, to do a bunch of work that might be relevant to then further understand how to set up the team for success and who to hire at the right time. So sometimes we see that happening too fast without great thinking behind. So this is a point of consideration. At the same time, you asked if any skills or any courses. Of course, there are plenty of things that founders can go through in order to get more knowledge about product development, technology. So there is abundance, I would say, of content about that. So of course, any deeper knowledge on those topics, I would say, can only benefit a founder to enrich and make his vision solid. But again, my main point would be for a founder to be really focused on the vision and what the problem are really trying to solve with the product, and to inject this into constantly into the product development cycle.
Interesting. So you touched on a very interesting point in the sense that a lot of the times, in the broader ecosystem globally, we hear this phrase, move fast and break things. That you have an idea, you quickly work on it, build out that MVP, launch it, and then test it out. But you're bringing forward this idea that while there is merit to that philosophy, you still need to, as a founder, step back and take that time to do that critical thinking and to make sure that your value proposition is solid before you even get into the product development side of things, right?
Yeah, you're right. Look, there was this statement from a satirist and journalist, Chris Mencken. He was saying something like that: for every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. So one of the traps that honestly, in my experience, that we see, that founders and startups can fall into is this hyperbolic discounting on people and culture. That means if you consider the time from present situation, so early on, there might be a need for urgency and speed because you think, hey, I'm launching a product, so there are product launch deadlines. There are pitches that we need to do, investor meetings, sales targets. But then, it all ends up always to the same place where, you need to resolve issues in the team. You need to understand how to give feedback. You need to figure out culture. So, there is little thinking when it comes to product development on the real organizational blueprint for success. And thinking about also when it comes to hire the team, I would say, what is that the founder is looking for when hiring, especially thinking about the product development, and what are the things that you look into people when you hire the team, because there are certain sort of people that that when you have them on board, then you need to play a little bit the carrot and the stick game, because maybe they are just based, the hiring is being just based on skills, or the motivation was, yes, the work, but also maybe the pay, or the way these people have been used to work was more through formal process or direct monitoring or things like that. Whereas if you really hire talent that that you can give them freedom, responsibility, that talent that you see potential to grow, they love the work, they have autonomy, that can also help to set up a better a better structure and organizational blueprint also for the product development within the startup. And honestly, we have evidence from some research that the startups that are able to invest into this kind of profiles, so the profiles that have more potential to grow, they love their work, they have more autonomy, they have also a faster growth in market capitalization. So there is a real link between the team you set up for product development and the impact you have. So my advice for founders would be to be very deliberate about the people decisions. Sometimes we see that given the rush, the urgency, given the need to run really quick, there is not enough planning or thinking or being intentional about this decision. Whereas hiring is the most important thing that a founder can do. So raise the bar with each hire and not necessarily hire fast. Understand the need of speed. So it's a little bit a paradox. So of course you need to be fast in the execution, but not necessarily for hiring, because then that could be the starting point of failure if you don't do that right. Because the cost of a toxic employee, is definitely higher of their contribution. So meanwhile, on one hand, you need to hire slow. On the other hand, firing fast if you see that the culture and the team is not performing or working in the same direction, especially when it comes to product. That's also key. Again, my point of view is the culture is really defined during the crisis moments. So in my opinion, you have to double down when the pressure is really high.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and definitely, I think like that's a very valid point. So, and I think we're kind of, just to kind of recap what we've been discussing so far, is that more than the technical side of things, as a founder, what you really need to do is build that mindset and that culture within the team. And the second aspect of a great product development journey is really understanding the value proposition that you're offering to your customers and validating that value proposition before you even get to the actual building of the product. And Roberto, like I'd like to now kind of shift the conversation a little bit to the situation that a lot of founders are finding themselves in at the moment. Perhaps they're building their products at the moment, and suddenly this crisis emerges. So what tips would you have for them at this point in time, especially given resources are going to be limited, cash is probably going to be a bit tight to come by. So what suggestion or what advice do you have for those founders at the moment?
Sure. Look, again, there is no right or wrong answer here, and happy to then have a conversation through the questions. I'm sure there will be, but for sure, one thing is this is the best time to first of all review the narrative and review the value proposition and see if there are opportunities that the product that you have in your hands can be leveraged for something else, or pivot towards a direction where you can leverage what you have for something that was not initially meant for, right? And we did a session a few days ago with exactly to share insights from some founders and investors in the region. We invited people and founders and also from other regions, including India and China, for example. China has been hit early on about the situation, so they have some learnings to share because they've been into this also before. And it was very interesting to hear, for example, from these founders how they've been quickly reacting to leverage components or part of the product that they had for a different purpose or a different need, but still the technology was built and the product was built in a way that they could have re-leveraged what they had in their hands to address a different problem. So I would say if you have a kick-ass, awesome team in your hand and you are building technology in an agile way, I would say that like in every crisis, crisis in Chinese, it's made by two symbols. One is danger, and of course, situation is tough, and there are a lot of serious things to consider and protect your employees, etc. But at the same time, there is always opportunity. So there might be some lateral thinking or thinking out of the box or different way of thinking where maybe you already have in your hands part of the product that you could leverage for something else. So this is one consideration. The other thing that would apply now more than ever, but I would say even without the current situation, is for the founder to be the one that anticipate and force sensitive discussions. That means, for example, talking about the elephant in the room. So the founder should be the one that is sensitive, he raises the right questions that no one want to talk about. And this comes through, feedback. This comes also from diversity of, diversity of thinking. So having diverse teams will definitely be a plus for those startups that have been investing into that, because that diversity of thinking in a situation like that can help with ideas and approach that other startups might not have. And also being able to have this flow of feedbacks, with being able to get regular and quality feedback, but to get transparent feedback, from the team. So one thing that we always see is most of the times is what we call fight against the groupthink. So you need to find people to disagree with you. So you don't you don't have to conform or be in a comfortable zone. You need to challenge as a founder the team around you and the product team, for example, to think differently. And there is no better time to do that. So this is also something that really help startups to be agile and adapt quickly to new context and new situation.
Definitely, and I think you made a very valid point there that like avoiding these discussions, about the current situation or where you find yourself in as a business or as a founder, won't help anyone. So it's better to kind of tackle those discussions head on. And you brought forth this notion of having an agile mindset, and we hear this term quite often, a lot in the ecosystem, but it from my perspective, to be honest, it doesn't just mean that you're thinking of 50 different things that you could do with your product. There are some, structured approaches that you can take to this agile mindset and agility itself. So I want to get your thoughts on that a little bit. Let's say I'm a founder, I have a product that I'm working on at the moment, and there's 5 or 6 or 7 different opportunities where I could potentially steer my product given this new situation that we find ourselves in. So how do you bring a little bit of a structured approach to that agility, and if that makes sense? Roberto, are you there? I think your mic is on mute.
Oh, sorry, I don't know. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's perfect. I
Sorry.
thought you dropped off for a second there. No worries. Yeah.
No worries. Sorry. So I was saying, I saw there are a few questions here in the chat, so we will address those as well. To your question first, and summarize what I was saying is basically on your question about agile and being agile and agility. My point of view is that agile is not necessarily a framework. There are many frameworks out there. You can Google it and you find, and there are a number of tips, and okay, fine. But it's more a set of values and principles. So the right foundations for agile, from my perspective, is that you start with the right mindset. That means that you understand that customer preferences and the corresponding solutions can change frequently. So you structure your product development for that. You understand that problems are complex, solutions are unknown, and scope is not clearly defined. So you don't have an expectation that everything is written out there and it's clear. And that incremental developments have value for customers. So definitely set up your product development in a way where you can start, kind of iteratively, where you roll out and you are always in beta, like we used to say, for example, at Google. So you roll out your product, your solution, you get feedback, you factor that in, and you seek for maximizing your impact. And you need to set up also the product development team, in a way where you learn from mistakes. Most of the times, I know that people want to have, you know, a bullet list, bullet point of list of, hey, these are the 5 things to follow in a row, and this is how we do product development. It doesn't work like that. Every organization, this has to fit into the culture first. So if you don't set up your teams and the product development team interaction with the rest of the startup in a way that you learn from the mistakes, and you cannot imagine how many startups don't do that, so that you're set for failure. So it's fine to make mistakes. It's great, but you have to learn from it. So that's how you fail forward and not just fail. So the culture of failure comes with, yes, everybody's talking about, you know, failure is good, yes, but you need to learn from failure and you need to fail forward. Then that said, I would say that the product development starts with what I said before. One thing is definitely incremental development. So you need to set up the product development in a way that is incremental, that you need to learn from mistakes. Also, some principles before getting into more, even more depth. I would say you always need to build something that is putting the user in mind first, right? So simple and intuitive. Simplicity is, it needs to be an obsession. So the customer experience need to be factoring in product development. So you need to have people in the product development that really understand and are kick ass into developing the right customer experience. Real time, I say it's more of a need today, especially in a situation where you need to adapt quickly. So for example, think about in a situation like that, providing real-time update of supply availability. Having this as a principle, of course it depends on what you're building, but having this as a principle that guides your product development is really key. Especially, it will be more and more relevant in the coming months and years. I would say empowering the customer. Empowering the customer means that you love your customers, so you really develop the product with your customers in mind. So you need to take those heavy users or pioneers early on and spend time with them. You don't have to be, if you spend now we are all on virtual, of course, but so allow me the language to use. But if you don't get out of your building and you don't spend time with the customer building your product, you again, you're set for failure. You need to involve them early on. And then the more, another principle that in product development you need to include is for sure dynamic development. So so that will allow you to pivot and to reuse components that maybe you were not thinking of in the first place, but then you can build on top. So and the last point I would say that I see successful startups do is a smart partnership in terms of a number of startups. Sometimes you see that they again fall in love with something and they try to reinvent the wheel, whereas someone else already built that and you can just build on top of that. So build on each other's strengths and have a more open approach with integration, APIs, and access. This make a huge difference in the number of startups in how fast they are able to go to market and to build their solution. Let me see if there are questions. So, but we can go, maybe we have the Q&A later, but let me see if this is relevant so far. And I was answering your question, Isham.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we are getting questions in the Q&A box as well. So if you want to address them as we go along, I'm happy to do that. But before we kind of get to that, I'd just like to reiterate this point, at least from my perspective, as we're having this conversation. To be honest, I'm not seeing significant differences when it comes to product development, whether you're in a crisis or not, because we keep coming back to this notion that it's all about the customer. You still need to have those conversations. They're the ones who are going to guide that product development process, and this sense of culture that you build as a founder. So I think that's a key point to take away for everyone who's listening at the moment, is because from our side as Sheraa, when we're talking about this conversation of product development, we try to reiterate these principles. of conducting those customer surveys, having those conversations, validating that value proposition before you even get into product development, and the culture side of things. So I think that's a very interesting takeaway. And would you agree, Roberto, that is the case, that the crisis perhaps has accelerated that process in a way, but it hasn't really changed the fundamentals of product development?
Honestly, in between you and me, I agree with what you're saying. It's not as if you should think that you are always on a crisis, right? But it's more if you really set the principles right within the startup, and this is part of the culture again. But if you set these principles right and these principles guide the product development, then definitely maybe you don't have the solution on day one. To pivot, but you have the right framework and foundation to pivot and to be more agile or faster to adapt. And this, is, I would say, you don't have to wait a crisis to do that. And when a crisis comes, you have that in your DNA. I mean, it's the way you are that react like that. Actually, this would apply to a startup, would apply to yourself as a human being to react to things. So I would say this is more in terms of cultural principles and values that definitely guide also product development. I give you an example. So we were talking with customers. So Nestle, for example, in China, where the outbreak hit first. One thing that they reacted very quickly was, for example, they started immediately the product development of their machine that were with the touch screens, and voice interaction. So just to avoid, those machines that might be in shared space where a lot of people touch, they have to touch, and then there is a possibility to spread, the virus even more. They have converted, leveraging technology, embedding it quickly into a new version of it that is embedding new technology. But they were able to do that because the product development allowed them to, just quickly shift into something new. Of course, we're talking about, a company where, it's not a new product or launching a new business, a new startup. So it's just an example of how quick, from a product development perspective, even not a startup, but large companies have been reacting to that. So this is just an example. Also, I would say, Agile, we talk about agility. So this agility comes from, I would say, seamless collaboration. Because again, product development has to develop features that enable adequate visitor or user or customer tracking and experience personalization, right? So the product development needs to be integrated into, let's say, the analytics of the company, into the design and content, into the on-site experience, into the CRM, into channels, into the commercial side. So the collaboration, so the alignment needs to be, of course, from all functions.
Definitely. That's a very interesting point. And I can see that we're getting a lot of questions now in the Q&A. So I'll kind of like pick and choose a couple, and get your thoughts on those. So, we have a question here, which is like, do you have any recommendations in terms of, online sites or these tools that are available for product development that you think would be easy for a non-technical founder to use? So perhaps there's something from Microsoft that's being offered, or have you come across any other tools for product development?
Yeah, absolutely. So we definitely we can share. There is definitely on Microsoft Learn a few relevant webinars and resources that we'll be happy to share as a follow up. Also, from my previous experience in previous company, I can definitely, for sure, in other larger technology companies, there are a set of guidelines and tools that definitely might guide the development process in terms of either frameworks or playbooks or guiding principles when it comes to product development. Think about the sprint process, for example, when it comes to I'm sure you have heard about the Agile. We talked about Agile, for example, and the whole sprint planning, backlog, Scrum, the Agile methodologies. So there are numerous other methodologies on top of Agile framework. Think about, I don't know, Kanban, Crystal, extreme programming, dynamic systems development method. There was another feature-driven development. So there are a number of those. So Definitely, yes. So the short answer is yes. Yes, we can follow up with a short list of some relevant webinars and content. And again, then we can go even deeper. Think about the same set of principles or resources. There are a similar set for example, if you think about UX UI, or think about design thinking. Design thinking is really part of also of this conversation when you talk about agile or starting with the customers in mind, or empathy with the customer and product development. So yes, there are a number of frameworks I would be definitely happy to recommend. Again, there is ton of those kind of resources around. So the exercise I would do is definitely valuable. Spend the time and the effort to go through these resources. It's more as usual the use you're going to use to do of those, right? So it's how you embed those into your own cycle development and your own culture is the key that will differentiate. But yes, definitely happy to share.
Yeah, great. And whenever you can send those across to us, or after the webinar, we'll definitely share it with all the attendees. There's an interesting question because in the Q&A, which talks the person is asking. How can startups face this crisis while they still don't have an online platform? So they could be like a small business that's been conducting business offline, and suddenly they're forced to shut down for a period of time or things like that. So kind of, if you could briefly just give your advice to that aspect, how can they potentially approach making this shift to digital as quickly as possible? Do you have some insights on that?
Absolutely, yes. So this is a great question. Think about myself as a parent. I'm going through this indirectly these days. Think about schools. It's not a small business, but they were definitely offline business. And now as a parent, I don't know how many parents are here in the audience and share this video. Of course, it depends also on the age of your kids. But for example, in my case, it's not an easy experience in these first days of distance learning for kids. Because what schools, and I'm not blaming them, because of course they didn't have the time to react to the crisis, but they could have thought of this, of course, regardless of the crisis. Is they just most of them, they just moved the same experience and the same schedule and the same stuff that was happening offline onto the online app with technologies or tools that were there since 10 years. So where is the real innovation there? So what we need is, when we talk about, for example, schools going digital, is not what is happening today. It's something really different. So that there should be, a different platform with, again, starting with a customer in mind, in this case, children, students, starting with them in mind, loving them. What is how to redesign an experience, given that maybe, let's say, distance learning is here to stay. I'm not going that conversation, but just using this as an example, as we have been working with a lot of companies that, this buzzword of digital transformation. We have been hearing this for the last 10 years, probably. And the real thing is that it's digital. You don't have to think about it. It's like you really need to start with the customer first. I don't know how to pass this concept in a better way, but it's not only, the digital is not adding much, honestly, if you just replicate and copy and paste, what you're doing through different channels across the different channels without adapting to it, and without understanding the context and the intent of the users. Users are becoming more curious, more demanding. They pretend things more in real time. For example, leveraging my experience at Google, you see what users are searching for can tell a lot about user behavior. So that needs to guide the way you think of shifting to digital, because most of the companies, what they're doing, large organizations, that they didn't see it coming, or they didn't have the culture to react, or they didn't have the vision and the strategy and the leadership to act on time on that. They are going to die. They're going to die, honestly, because they don't have the mindset to really understand that it's not about offline, online, or two separate channels, or having another channel too. So those two things are, so the strategy is one, and the user, the consumer in the real world is the same person, is how you understand his needs, how you understand his behavior, how you understand his intent, how you understand how to talk to him, how to keep engagement with him, how to be relevant to him. So starting from that guide, okay, we can leverage digital this way because that's the experience that could be really having an impact or adding value or whatever. So back to your point, if you are a small business, so this is how I would think of what are the opportunity, where is the opportunity? Me being a small business that I am offline, now that I could reach potentially, users virtually across different regions here, wherever, what is the set of competencies and value and assets that I could be relevant and extend to users in a meaningful way? And then after that, I see, is that a digital channel? Is that an offline channel? Is that a combination of both? Is that, this comes after. Then if you need to go online, if you're a small business, there are a number of resources again and steps that you can go through. For example, I'm working with a number of partners that are really focusing on SMEs and small businesses to help them, think through this and go leverage technology in a way that could be meaningful to them. I would say you don't necessarily need a huge budget to go online. So there might be smart strategies and smart approaches to move your business online, depending, of course, it's again, we are having a general conversation, but depending, of course, what you are doing.
Yep.
So don't think necessarily that you need a relevant huge budget to leverage some of the channels that are online. It's again more about what is the value that you can provide and the willingness to pay for that from users to engage on that relationship.
Interesting. So kind of just to summarize a little bit, like if you're an offline business, first you need to look at what your core competencies are as a business before you even think of making that shift digitally. But then, and if I understood correctly, I think the best approach is to look for existing solutions in the short term, but then definitely do think about how you can change that experience over a longer time frame, right?
Yes, plus I would say there might be some principles from, what people usually refer to as growth hacking that might be really relevant, for example, for small businesses trying to figure out how to go online. So a few of those principles top of mind for me is definitely one is targeting. So understand how, who is your audience, how you define your users. This is something that is really key. So target is something that requires some time. And for example, this is as easy as for a small business, understand, how to set up a landing page and get more signups, for example. So, but who we are targeting for that. So this is a key principle, who we are doing it for and how we are talking to the different audiences differently to move online and improve the engagement and the conversion rate of the goals that you set for your business online. Another principle I would say is we talked before about simplicity. So one of the key principles that I love in growth hacking is reduce things. So imagine, it's easy to say, imagine the Google homepage is super easy, right? It's just a search box. I'm not saying that's easy to do and every business should do that, of course. But the principle itself for a small business thinking of going online, the more you're able to reduce to the user interface or your online presence to the thing that really engage or is relevant for your users. This is an invaluable principle that you should factor in the product development and your go-to-market, your go-to product, if you want it for users. Another thing that I would factor in from early on, in the product development for a small business thinking about online is the principle of embedding things. So build your solution in a way that maybe it can be embedded also somewhere else, because that would give you open a window of consideration of thoughts that you might think about partnerships that you were not considering in the first place. Of course, again, this is a general principle. It has to marry with your business model, your revenue model, and a number of other things. But I've seen a number of founders that leverage that to have a very smart go-to-market and this very smart approach in terms of openness to integrations that enable them to achieve success and impact in a meaningful way. And the other consideration I would say in terms of growth hacking for a small business is you need to build your ambassadors. You need to build the users that you really empower. So, and again, there are ways through technology that are relatively low budget where you can work on that. You can really leverage users, especially your power users, in a way that you can turn them into ambassador. You can show how they are different. You can make them feel better and what you want them to share, for example, and become your ambassadors. So your content and communication strategy, or maybe some sort of gamification, sometimes could be charity or good cause, working towards a common goal, or social media content. So there are a number of tactics and tools that you can use to achieve that. Because then when you have ambassadors, the other thing is you might also think of working with influencers to get them as supporters. This is also relevant. Or you might think that what your company is you want to be a product company or a service company leveraging tech. So what is your positioning, and how are you thinking of your partnerships? So and in terms of partnerships, another idea could be related to what I was saying before about embedding, is if you have a kind of, let's call it a reseller strategy, or something that is some other businesses that can sell for you, or you can sell jointly, sort of an outsource marketing. I've seen, for example, this is a startup, two startups that are here in the region. One of them, the founders are from China, and the others are local here. So one of them, they have been seriously hit because they were in let's say in the travel tech industry, and the other one was more in the business of supply chain. So still, they found they found a way to engage together and find a way where they could leverage each other competencies and skills and platforms to build something, even if it's going to be a temporary business, but maybe it's not there to stay, but meanwhile it's helping to extend their runway. So I wouldn't discard that option given the current situation as well. But that comes from being open to diversity and being open to understanding how smart partnerships can help also sustain your product development and your business development as well.
Definitely, and I think like a lot of the principles that you touched on right now, I don't think that like they're just limited to small businesses that are operating offline. A lot of these can be applied to online businesses as well at the moment, because right now like for example, smart partnerships is your best bet, because it doesn't really cost much, but you're tapping into complementary resources to continue that customer acquisition, for example, or keep growing your business. So there's a lot of parallels, I suppose, between small businesses and like technology startups in terms of operating in the current crisis. We have another question, and this is like perhaps I think a key one to kind of address, and maybe like if probably if you could answer this in a more broad sense, in terms of product development, right? So when we're talking about a team or the structure of the team, kind of who leads that process? A lot of the times product development is outsourced to software development houses. So maybe if you can talk about that structure or that communication a little bit, just for some of the first time founders that are looking to get into startups.
Yep, this is a great question. Again, I always premise there is no right or wrong answer here, and I'm just sharing my point of view here. From my point of view, yes, there is a lot of outsourcing happening when it comes to product development, and of course, this might make sense honestly if you can leverage, especially at a time like this one, resources that are not necessarily in house. That's fine. But my point is. Uh, you need to own first of all you need to own product development. So for me you as a founder first, and then when it's the right time, again we are talking about startups that might be across different stages, life cycles, so before ideation, after ideation, so we can go into details, but I would say you yourself or your chief product officer, if you want to call it, or whoever is in charge of product at a later stage of the startup, you need to have that, and you need to own that, and that person, from my perspective, his background doesn't so it can be technical, but it has to be the challenger person. He has to be the person that asks the right questions. He has to be the person that is the one that challenge things, and as maybe a contrarian point of view, but not necessarily. But he needs to be the challenger, right? So the way it works is, yes, you need to build your team. And the first 10 hires in every startup is always the most critical, because when we talk about culture, is with these people that you start defining and setting the culture, right? So whether you as a founder in an earlier stage, or you with your chief product, you need to have someone that really understand the principles we were saying before, understand technology, and can marry the both together. So the product managers, should be people that start the product development process with the users in mind, that understand the business. And then, I would outsource, of course, whenever you have clarity, a clear plan, a clear strategy, a clear vision of your product in-house, then yes, whatever else, depending again on the situation, on the size, on many different things, there is no harm in outsourcing part of the development, or some tasks outside. I don't see that as a big um, constraint in principle, but yes, I definitely would own the customer development part of the product development. That is where it needs to be grounded into who you are as a company, what is your mission, and what you want to do. Then in terms of agile transformation, again, that doesn't happen in one day. So first, yes, you need to build your team. So then, of course, you need to set goals, then execute and debrief. So you need to have this virtuous cycle of feedback that inform how you're going to redefine your goals and act accordingly. Let me know if I've answered your question, because this is very interesting, and we can go, a little more deeper into that.
No, I mean, like, I think, just for the attendees and for their information as well, I think we're good for time. So if you want to dive into this a little bit deeper, I'm happy to do that as well, because it like you mentioned, it is a very important aspect of product development, and perhaps especially now more than ever, to be mindful of these things. So yeah, please feel free to elaborate a little bit more if you'd like to do that.
Yeah, look, the important thing, and this is where, by the way, not only startups, but even larger organizations then end up being stuck in their growth, is it all ends up always the same. You hear this over and over, that organizations grow, and then they start being siloed in different departments and different teams that do not talk each other, and then all gets diluted, and then you are stuck with execution. So organization-wise, from my perspective, product development, so the chief product or the founder, they really need to make sure that there is strong communication, maybe over communication, and there is no silos that are going to be created. And the focus also should not just be on the work to be done, but on the sources to get the job done. And this might seem a subtle difference, but this is mainly the founder responsibility to make sure that the sources are live, that there is enough oxygen, if you want, for these sources to be able to breathe, so that there is, that the people that are receiving sufficiently, learning, ongoing learning for their, nurturing their skills and balance with the time, etc. So I would say this is extremely important. It's also related to that. I would say is also the success metrics that you set that also drive the product development. Because depending on how you set success, how you define success when it comes to developing product, that is the direction that you are set to, right? So, and how you follow up and how you ensure that these metrics are relevant for the team, and you live by those metrics. For example, when we talk about transformation, when we talk about success metrics, sometimes we see startups that react more, are more reactive when it comes to setting metrics, in the sense that they look at the macro numbers, unit economics, but then they don't really know how those speak with the execution on the ground and the product development. So maybe having a good framework in mind in terms of the metrics, whether it is a customer lifetime value or acquisition, retention, loyalty, frequency, but that relate also to the features and the development of the product. So this is something important that you need to set up with the product and the product development team. One example is, for example, how technology companies like Google, for example, the work is setting OKRs. So there are company OKRs and there are the different team OKRs, right? So, and of course they are interrelated. So there is nothing happening in terms of execution that doesn't contribute to the overall impact that the company has set as a strategy. So this is relatively easy to set up. It's not a difficult concept, but you would be surprised by how many startups and organizations are not operating by that, or are not setting those clearly in a way that is measurable. So still there are some decisions that for sure comes from gut feeling and experience, but there are also a way to set up OKRs and performance in a way that it really drives the execution in the right way. Towards the real impact that you want to have, and towards the development of the product that it has an impact on the users. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that very detailed answer to the to that particular question. I think it's important to understand. And you mentioned that this concept of the OKR, let's say, philosophy, and I think that's very important for startups, regardless of the size, to utilize and kind of and again, if you're like not too familiar with all of these concepts, I do encourage the attendees to do their research, to understand about these different concepts, because like Roberto mentioned earlier in the webinar, every startup is so unique that there is unfortunately probably not a specific bullet point list that can be communicated that, okay, you should do A, B, C, and D, and you have your product. There are so many different elements and principles that are out there that you could potentially integrate into your product development journey. And this is more in general a mindset that we encourage as Sheraa, is have that learning mindset. See what's out there, understand those principles. No one will expect you to be, an expert at coding, for example, but familiarize yourself with these different concepts and see which ones work best for your particular business. I'd like to move on.
Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah.
No, just to your point, in my opinion, I don't think you need to be an expert into the details of coding, or understanding necessarily the details of technologies, integrations, those deep technical layers. But you imagine yourself as a user, imagine you have a black box in front of you, but you control it. You have a tuner, you have inputs, and you have outputs. So you don't necessarily need to know the technical details within the chips and the transistors and whatever is inside that box. Of course, if you know that and you're passionate and you have time and you know that it's a plus, it's better. But as a user or decision maker, you have many ways in terms of leadership, culture, people management, and being in control of the tuner and asking the right questions and tuning and seeing, given this input, to expect and see the result and then give feedback. So you need to see yourself more or less someone like a DJ or someone like that is tuning that machine, not necessarily knowing all the details about that. And then I had a few points about the OKRs, but I don't want to take the time. So if we have other questions, of course, happy to help.
Kind of like I just like to put forward this, since we're talking about that, that you don't need to be an expert. I think this is something that I do all the time. Is whatever new app or new product that's in the market, that's in the news or whatever, I'll download their app or go to their website and kind of I do like a critical analysis just for my own understanding, or okay, so what's their UX like, what's the interface like, what are potentially some of the more complicated things that they have integrated. And I by no means am specialized in product development in that respect, but it gives a lot of insights, like we mentioned earlier in the webinar, about the value proposition, the kind of the strategy that they've applied to deliver that value proposition. So that's perhaps one way the attendees can approach this as well. But building on, and because we're talking about a lot about feedback and customer feedback is really important. But there's a very valid question by one of the attendees, that how can you continue product development without proper customer feedback given the current situation, right? Because a lot of customers aren't trying out new products, new services, or there's just like a limit, because of how the situation is. So is there a way that they can potentially still continue their product development, Roberto, without having that explicit feedback for the iterative process?
Yeah, there must be a way. There have to be a way. So, for example, for sure, and again, we are talking, in a very general way. So every situation or specific industries might have specific issues. So don't quote me on that. But in general, as a general principle, for sure, in this situation, there might be some industries or startups or companies that are, allow me to use this term, benefiting from the situation, or let's say leveraging some opportunities faster because of they have an increased number of users that leverage their platforms. Think about the edtech, health tech, or think about some e-commerce. I was talking about with a large one of the largest e-commerce here, and they tripled their users on the site in the last couple of weeks. So it's understandable, right? So and at the same time, of course, there are other industries, startups that are maybe we're on a specific solution or specific industry where they are really hit hard about the current situation. So yes, you might have a sort of a gap in terms of feedback from users, because all of a sudden you have way less users than before. Still, there might be creative ways to engage with users, with customers. Again, it's difficult to give a precise answer, not knowing the specific industry or vertical, but in principle, today's technology gives us different ways to interact and being in touch and being relevant to users. And it could be that it could be in the form of a conversation, it could be in the form of a different sort of partnership, it could be in the form of a survey, it could be in the form of a focus group or listening, or it could be in the form of, there are different ways of being in touch. That doesn't mean that this necessarily input directly into product development as it is, of
Mhm.
course. But this is one thing. The other thing is figuring it out. Sorry, scenarios, and having a solid vision about, if there are ways to turn this situation into an opportunity. Again, easy to say, but there might be ways of looking at it in terms of what else, or what if, or where you can get additional users or engagement that can feed into in terms of valuable insights or feedbacks into product development. And there might be ways of maybe leveraging the crowdsourcing in terms of getting help or getting feedback during this situation, that might be leveraged as well to get some sort of inputs also that might be relevant for product development. Again, I know that this answer doesn't really answer the question, because again, we should be very much specific on a specific situation to go in depth. But in terms of general principles, I'm always positive in the sense that even in the hardest situation, I believe that there might be ways of leveraging things, turning things, pivoting things, turning around, or find different ways of doing things that we were not doing before. So I would just share, a positive message in terms of uh, leverage your network, the diversity of thinking, crowdsourcing technologies, reach out to different sort of communities or channels to seek for feedback or help, and there might be still ways to engage customers, depending again on which solution we are talking about, that were not thought of before.
Definitely, I think, I mean, this is true, I guess, like not just for startups, all across. It's having that positive mindset that, they're like you mentioned, there are still opportunities out there, a certain segment of the world, like they're seeing, e-commerce, for example, has seen a surge in demand all of a sudden, food delivery, grocery deliveries, for example. So there are opportunities out there, and I think there are ways to still engage with your target customers in terms of feedback and conversation. I think it's just those ways might have evolved a little bit very quickly. So, for example, webinars and these virtual panels and discussions, suddenly there's a lot of this activity happening in this vertical. Podcasts are potentially another way to gauge that interest or get that feedback, because it's very engaging. You can, like even today we're getting so many questions from the attendees. So it's probably, you won't be able to obviously go out and physically talk to your customers at this point in time. But certainly, like you mentioned, Roberto, there are the opportunities. You have to keep that positive mindset and figure out those newer ways to get that feedback. Which again, I think it's important to reiterate that message, that just because you're not getting that immediate feedback, that your product development has to stop, because you will have already done that process of validating the problem, what that value proposition is. So to an extent, your product development will still continue, but perhaps you just need to be a little bit more mindful in terms of the pace of that development. Should you speed it up? Should you slow it down a little bit? Given the current situation. So Roberto, and building on the mindset, and this is probably a more general kind of a question, but it's an interesting one that I think I'd like your insights on. So is there a shift from the mindset that startups used to have in terms of thinking globally but acting locally, and is it shifting more towards now you have to think locally but kind of act globally, because suddenly this virtual reality that we find ourselves in has opened so many doors that you can connect with someone who's in San Francisco while you're staying in Dubai. So do you see that kind of paradigm shift happening going forward for startups?
This is an awesome question. So this is really interesting, Isham. So it's a great question. I would say my point of view again, it would be is before saying globally, locally, locally, globally, and in the right order, or I would say. What is the problem? So I would say I would encourage even more, to understand what are, the problems. And we are seeing in this situation that there are a number of problems that can impact, a number of people that have to be addressed. So I see that as an opportunity, even if it's not in the core business or in the same industry you are in. But broadly speaking, this situation has been made it evident, or has made more people aware about a number of problems that are out there that can really have a huge impact on billions of people. So again, it's easy to say. For example, at Google for product development, one of the principles was the toothbrush test, right? That if the product you are going developing, whether it was an additional feature or a new product, wouldn't be used at least twice by users, it wouldn't make sense to spend time on it, right? Like you would use a toothbrush at least twice a day, hopefully. So that was one of the one of the guiding principles. Like now we learned that we need to wash our hands at least once a day for 20 seconds, but I hope that this is something people were already doing. But of course, I'm joking here. So I would say, so I would look into what is the real, so before thinking of locally, globally, which I'm coming to that now, but I would first, the first thing I would have in my mind as a founder would be, what is the impact? What is the problem we're trying to solve? Where is that we can have an impact on, let's say billions of users, but even if it's not a billion, this rounded number don't make any sense, honestly, but on a large number of users, because there is where there is, of course, more opportunity and scale, right? So this is what would be, for example, my mindset into how I would look into the problems. And now, again, we've seen a number of problems that are out there that needs to be solved. Hopefully, there are founders companies that would invest into try to solve those. And we're seeing a number of startups also in this region that already started working on some awesome ideas for that. Then locally, globally, yes. I mean, we have been talking about globalization and being in a global world for years, right? And then I will not add any political comment here, but you saw what happened in a region like Europe, for example. The first thing that happened was every country is closing their borders. So where is the thinking, the global things when everything, because everything is still structured with and even within some country there is even more fragmentation on that. So, but we should think about people first. We should think about what's common to people, what's the impact, what's the value, regardless of the borders. Then if, for example, we act locally, because locally it's a perfect test bed for experiment the thing and see if that thing really is adding value, and then scale. Yes, why not? Perfect. So even before thinking globally, if sometimes you get something that it works for the local ecosystem and it's impacting the people, there's no need to stress about having a global thinking. If you see that there is immediate impact on the people, then that thing will scale for sure, because at the end of the day we see, even in this situation, we are all human beings, and there are a common set of needs, and that can be addressed at the same time. So this is something. So there is also a social dimension that needs to be discussed when we think about thinking locally, globally. And the whole concept of capitalism has been put in discussion, at least with the current situation, for example. So how, as a social entrepreneur, or how as an entrepreneur and founder, you're factoring in the social impact into what you are trying to do. I guess that will also impact the way you are thinking locally, globally, and what is the impact you aim to achieve with your startup. Not sure I've answered your question. Just a few thoughts here to share. It's more a conversation here, but my point of view would be to focus on the problems that really have an impact for mankind, for human beings, for us. And then if the execution happens locally before scaling or globally day one, I mean, who cares?
Yeah, no, definitely, I agree with that. And I personally like fundamentally believe that if you're trying to solve a real problem that exists, you know, within whether it's within your community or your you know city, country, broader you know region, whatever it is, and as long as it is a real problem, and you're providing a solution that makes sense to that problem, the scale and the let's say the globalization of that will eventually come. You know, obviously, I'm being a little general here. It won't be true for every solution out there, but that's generally what my experience has been. That real problems in the ecosystem and you know solid solutions are your basic recipe for a startup success in that manner.
One thing,
So
one
yeah,
thing
please,
that
please. Yeah.
I would love to comment on this as well is, on the other hand, it is true though that if I compare, you know, the ecosystem, the startups in this region, again, generally speaking, versus other ecosystems, it is true that this ecosystem is probably lacking um, uh, an attitude or a framework to think export first, or to think, you know, to develop a product that can go, you know, or globally, or that can scale beyond the region. A few challenges I see is we often refer to MENA as one region, and if on one hand I get it and I understand and I agree, I mean, there is a lot of commonalities. At the same time, most of the times we see some frictions as well for, you know, startups that are in one of the countries here in MENA and try to, you know, go to market to other countries, because there are still also a lot of differences on different dimensions. So it's not that cohesive or uniform region. So it's even within the borders of what we call MENA, Middle East and North Africa, might not be easy to scale today, depending again which industry and what startup we are talking about. But if I compare to other ecosystems that I've had the pleasure to work with, is also, I see it's a matter still again of mindset, attitude of thinking export, thinking global from day one, thinking, we are tapping into a problem that, you know, we can, you know, scale it, you know, globally day one, or we can structure our organization in a way that we can broaden our reach differently, or we can have a much broader impact. Then totally, I understand that, you know, one angle is we are basically, sometimes we are, you know, launching here startups that are, you know, existing models that are elsewhere, but adapted to the local Middle East, and this is great. Localization is relevant for people living here, so this is awesome. But for some of the initiatives, most of the initiatives that start from the region here, we see that compared to other regions, there is still a journey to go through to have more of the thinking and mindset of thinking real, to build something really you know, more export/global.
Absolutely, and that's it. That's an interesting, you know, insight on the broader ecosystem. And you know, Roberto, to that point, like because I'd like to kind of just start wrapping up the discussion a little bit now. Specifically, you know, in the region, from Microsoft's perspective, what are some of you know the tools or the support that you know our attendees can leverage or utilize that you're offering? You know, kind of if you could talk about that, because I think that's very important. Because one thing I've noticed is suddenly you know, because of this situation that we're in, a lot of ecosystem you know players have really stepped up, but not everyone may be aware of you know what that level of support is. So for example, from our side, we started you know the Small Biz UAE Slack channel, and we'll post the link to that in the chat, and we encourage you know all of our attendees to join that, because you know we kind of got together, or the idea is to try and get together as many you know industry experts and founders in one place, and you know have that conversation going. So from Microsoft's perspective, what's happening? What you know support can founders you know expect or get from Microsoft at the moment?
Absolutely. Thanks for asking, Isham. So definitely, I would say to be consistent with what I told before. First of all, one comment I want to do on this is it always boils down to people, right? So I must say, first of all, the first thing is that the Microsoft for Startups team globally is a team of people that are from the ecosystem. So either we have been either entrepreneurs, founders, or from the VC or accelerator side of things. So it's people that really get the ups and downs of founders and people that have been there or people that have that experience, right? So we totally have empathize and we are there with you. So the only I would say KPI or OKR, if you want to keep the conversation we had before right now is trying to help as much as we can the startups. So one thing that, so before talking about our programs and how we are setting the region, but the first thing I want to say is one thing that we did is we extended to all our partners, including, of course, Sheraa. We extended, broader support in terms of allowing our partners to extend access to a set of webinars and a set of office hours for founders or startups. And the cool thing I would say is the diversity of it behind, because, for example, for the office hours, myself, but also my counterparts and the CTOs in residence we have in the team volunteered to contribute with an amount of hours in the next 2-3 months. So, and everyone has a different skill set, different background, experiences from different regions. So founders and startups can tap into that wealth of thinking, experience, help. So definitely, this is something we started doing, and we communicated with you guys, so you can extend the access to those resources to founders and startups in the region, in your portfolio, in your community. So this is one thing. Then we are thinking also of other initiatives in terms of extending the impact of across the region, specifically for the Middle East. We run the first forum with some founders and investors from the region to share their point of view, their feedback. The feedback we got from that session was it was very honest. It was very direct and humble and insightful. So we can do more of that, but the key thing is that we are trying to do that in a meaningful, relevant way. For example, inviting also founders or investors that really did something different, that really did something in terms of pivoting or shifting or reacting to the situation in a healthy or meaningful way. On top of that, we have our programs as Microsoft for Startups. So we have programs that address startups, help startups on two angles: the technology side of things and the access to markets side of things. So those doors are there, and we aim to develop our presence in the region in a meaningful way, to work with startups where this value proposition resonates, where we can help. Especially we are mainly focused as of today on B2B startups, because of the value proposition is really in access to markets. We can really add value into that conversation. So we might experience a number of weeks now of delay in things because of the craziness of the situation, but we are there to help. Then we have other we launched some other initiatives that address specific things, like we discussed other times about the social entrepreneurship program, and about some other tips and sessions that we can have during these times to help on top of the office hours. So definitely, we are also in a listening mode. As you said, Isham, there is an abundance now of webinars. So we are in listening mode. So any feedback you guys have in terms of what is relevant, where you need most help, I can extend the survey we did with some startups to get a better sense of that, for example. But through whichever channel you have insights, feedbacks, requests, ideas, please feel free to share. From my point of view, when we discussed before about feedback, feedback is in order for feedback to work, it has to be two ways, right? So it's for startups to get feedback, for example, for customers to inform their product development, but you as well as a startup, you can give a lot of feedback to others, and this is where the cycle starts being virtuous and beneficial to help other people. So happy to hear from you guys as well, where you think we can have the most impact and value during these times, and where you would need most of help, given of course the capacity and the requirements to make those things happen. But it would be great to hear from you as well.
Yeah, definitely, and it's amazing that big like companies like Microsoft are extending such significant support to the ecosystem, and I completely echo your point about keeping that channel of communication open, not just between startups and customers, but startups and ecosystem players, and within the ecosystem players as well. It's important that we're trying to have these conversations as well, and I really appreciate you joining us on the webinar today. We've had a fantastic conversation so far. If I could ask you to kind of just we talked about a lot of different topics. So if you could just kind of recap a little bit, or give your top 2 or 3 or 4 advice points to our audience today, to kind of wrap up the conversation, because I think we touched on some unique topics, but there were some similar messages throughout the conversation. So I think it's imperative to highlight those again before we wrap up the webinar.
Absolutely. So let me try to do that. So definitely one thing we discussed about is the mindset. So one thing is mindset. So growth mindset, having a growth mindset, being in a learning mode, always look at every single situation as learning, being curious and failing the right way, failing forward. Having that mindset of accepting the success of others, building on top of the success of others. Having that sort of approach attitude, I think, is key, especially in these times. That help a lot. Protect your teams first, so that should be priority. Most of the failures within a VC portfolio, in the highest percentage, are most of them related to people issues. If we compare those to products, functional or market problems, etc. So it's really crucial that you focus on your people, you protect them, you focus on them, you focus on the sources needed for them to work during this situation and after. And that's a key principle for product development, but I would say it's even a more general principle. So I used to work at Google, and there was a former VP at Google. I don't know if you know him, Bill Cogram. He then went to Sequoia Capital, and he used to repeat all the time: engineering is easy, people are hard. So and I think this is real. This is true. I mean, there is no way you cannot learn the syntax or how a product works, a framework, and make it work. But people are hard. So that should be, the approach and focus number one. And this comes with a growth mindset that everyone can, develop their potential. And so focus on the sources needed for that to happen for your team is priority number one. We talked a bit about the traps of looking at problems and where to focus on, and speed, for example. Sometimes you need to slow down in order to go faster later. So I wouldn't worry too much if certain things appear or have the perception of being slow, as long as you are intentional and you know what you're doing. So for example, we talked about this with hiring. So hiring fast, if you hire the wrong people, is not good enough. So it's set for failure. Also, you end up always then to have to resolve issues later on and figure out culture later on, which is the recipe for failure as well. So the traps of speed you can solve that with focusing again on the right team, having an organizational blueprint for success, understand how you can raise the bar with people, and especially now, you need to double down on your culture, and especially now that the pressure is higher. So we discussed about that. We discussed about the trap of the inner circle. We discussed about the fact that you need to address the elephant in the room, give each other regular and quality feedback. We discussed about the trap of confidence. So you need to fight against the groupthink, find people to disagree with you. You need to value the same percentage of confidence and capability, while being kind with yourself, I would say, not stressing too much. So these are some of the tips. Then we discussed about agility and being agile. What does it mean? What could be some key principles in terms of, focusing on the user and the customer first, being obsessed about that, customer preferences. So being comfortable that things are changing in terms of customer preferences, in terms of solutions, in terms of problems being complex or solutions unknown. So you need to lean into this uncertainty. Actually, this is the new world. So as a leader in the new uncertain world, I would say before the world was more a black and white thing, right? So it was a little bit easier to make decisions. Today, you need to update yourself into a world that is full of paradoxes, even ethical dilemmas, as we see these days. So it's more an and also world. So it's not just black and white, it's more blurred. So I would say even more now than before, sticking to values, principles, and culture, I would say it's even more important. If you take responsibility in a causal sense, and you keep unrelentingly, quest for the truth in what you're doing, I would say this is something that is going to pay off. We talked about product development principles in terms of incremental developments, learning from the mistakes. You need to have that loop, yes or yes. Try to simplify interface or the experience as much as possible, real time as much as possible, when relevant, of course. Empowering your customer, targeting audiences differently with different messages. We talked about embedding things. So think about smart partnerships, how you can embed your solution. Think of it as a service solution or something. Think of it, look at your business from different angles, different perspectives. Have a diversity of thinking. Have always in your weekly calendar a meeting with someone that is not in your network or not in your core network or your core industry. Embed things. We talked about it. I would say also we talked about empowering users. So build your ambassadors, that can talk for you. That's going to pay off. Is less budget you need to spend, on paid media or advertising. And we talked about a little bit some frameworks, methodologies, the Agile framework, Kanban, Crystal, and a few others. And we said we can share a few relevant webinars and things. And we talked a little bit about, the need for collaboration, the need for focusing on the problem and the user first and spending time on that. And I think, these are top of mind, the main things we discussed today. And we talked a little also about the importance of setting OKRs, because we know that, that also builds, employees are more engaged and motivated when they see that they're contributing to achieving the goals of the organization. So it doesn't have to be sandbagging, because then if you regularly achieve, something, it's not pushing the teams. And I would say, I would double down on that, but in a healthy way during these times.
Absolutely, and I really appreciate that wonderful recap of the conversation. We touched on a lot of topics, but I think like you reiterated as well, and I mentioned also that it's the similar themes across product development is not significantly different than how you would potentially build your startup as well. It's about the people, it's about the culture, it's about the mindset. It's about sticking to certain principles and frameworks along the way. So I really appreciate it, Roberto, that you joined us. We had a very, very interesting chat. I would like to thank the audience as well for putting forward some very insightful questions. I hope this was, a useful webinar to have, and you got some interesting insights into it. The recording of the webinar will be available, so please feel free to follow us on our socials. We will post the link there so you can view it again and kind of recap the conversation at a later point in time. We've posted the link to our Slack channel in the chat. Please feel free to join that as well. We have a lot of industry experts, individuals that are willing to help in different aspects. So that's there. We're available, like Roberta mentioned, Microsoft is available as well. We'll try to share some more specific details through email in terms of the support that Microsoft is offering for startups and founders. But I think from my side, I would just like to appreciate again, Roberto, your time. I know it's really busy these days, so thank you for taking the time out to have this conversation with us.
Yeah, thank you, Isham. Thank you, Sheraa, for inviting me. It was really, really a pleasure. I enjoyed the conversation. If I see that there are a few questions that maybe we didn't address, and I'm more than happy to follow up and send the relevant information to answer all of those. And stay safe. Be positive, and we are all in this together. So the more we help each other, I truly believe this is going to pay off and be for the greater good. So thanks, Isham and Sheraa, for setting up these sessions. Looking forward to the next ones with a bunch of other people that can definitely add their experience and advice to everyone in this forum.
Great, thank you so much, and stay safe, everyone. Stay positive. Things hopefully will normalize soon. Thank you for joining us today.